the helicopter plays a strategic role in delivering troops, supplies and weapons to the battle zone. A shortage of aircraft in World War II led to the development of its larger and quieter predecessor, the glider. Members of the glider pilot regiment were termed total soldiers, trained in flying skills and ground combat. Glider pilots from our region took part in the landings at Sicily, Normandy, Arnhem and the Rhine crossing.
I was a very sort of naive 18-year-old. If you think of 18-year-olds before the war, we weren't like 18-year-olds now. Matured me.
We were fully combatant, and the idea was that wherever we landed in combat, we stayed with the forces that we landed until we were relieved.
RAF Dishforth near Ripon often hosts their reunions. Their regimental motto, "Nothing is impossible."
It was only a small unit, so when we have our meetings, of course, we always do an awful lot of reminiscing.
And after that, it was reasonably peaceful until we got to the Arnhem area.
Yes.
And then that Panzer division had wakened up, and they weren't sleeping anymore.
They were towed into war by RAF pilots like Flight Lieutenant David Campbell from Dunnington near York.
I always had a very good rapport with the glider pilots because you spoke to them en route in an operation, and you had every respect for them because when you got them there, they had to go down and do some fighting in the ground, whereas we eventually had to get back if we could, you know.
The glider pilots learned to fly on single-engine aircraft, but soon exchanged them for engineless and more vulnerable canvas and plywood.
These are military gliders, Horsa gliders, British-built and piloted by men of the Glider Pilot Regiment.
When I did my first solo, I sang all the way around at the top of my voice. And I thought it was a marvellous experience.
Well, the Horsa has been described as a flying lorry.
Even though they were quite large, they were still quite easy to fly.
The rope was taut, do that, and away you went.
You had to go very, very gently down the runway to take up the slack in the rope, because if you went too jerky or too fast, the rope could snap. They had to be very careful they got into the right high toe position, not too high, not too low.
If you got too high on takeoff, you tended to lift their tail up and they couldn't get off.
From these original plans, Britain's furniture manufacturers fashioned around 5,000 Horsa gliders. They've again become the blueprint for volunteers at RAF Shawbury near Shrewsbury, who are engineering the Horsa's resurrection.
This is unbelievable, John, isn't it?
Yes.
Jeff and John have travelled to Shawbury from their Yorkshire homes in Pocklington and Galfay near Ripon. They're among the first to step inside the new Horsa's ribcage.
Yes, it's really marvellous getting here again, John.
Yes, it brings it back, doesn't it?
After all these years, doesn't it?
We must have been mad.
I'm sure we were. Yes, with a Jeep at the back.
There were seats all along here.
That's right.
If you didn't have a Jeep in.
That's right.
Some across the back.
I never realised how intricate all this construction was, actually,
No.
John. And the strength of them, of course, was unbelievable, really, wasn't it?
Yeah.
This was where the cockpit was.
Yeah. And just here was the facilities for
relieving your feelings.
relieving your feelings. Another one at the back for those.
That's right.
Poor devils in the back.
At the back there.
Don't remember bumping my head in those days. But
No,
I must have
no.
now.
No complete Horsas still remain, but on D-Day, their highly skilled pilots came out with flying colours.
Well, this must have been a Mark II.
Yes.
It should be a trim on it, shouldn't it?
there should be a trim on it. Whether it,
Gliders like the Horsa played an important strategic role.
They told us on briefing that they expected somewhere in the region of between 60 and 70% casualties. But we were fortunate in as much there weren't so many killed on the actual operation as they had expected. We flew out towards the French coast, and I can remember all this flak coming up, and it was quite remarkable to watch it, because you saw it coming up and it just seemed to be coming up like this, and then when it got nearly level with you, of course it went whoosh.
But the Battle of Arnhem was to test the glider and its pilots to their limits.
Well, this is my logbook and the entry for Arnhem, Operation Market, when I took a section of 181 Field Ambulance, an officer, of course, and 15 men with a jeep and a handcart and a couple of bicycles. A rough idea, you know.
Oh, God. Yes. Well, of course, when I went into Arnhem, I took this jeep and a trailer like the one that's on here, and 12 paras actually, and the trailer was loaded with ammunition and petrol, of course, and the 12 paras that were with me, as soon as we landed, of course, they jumped in the jeep and drove off with it, and of course we had to walk.
We followed up on behind the South Staffs into Arnhem. They encountered extreme resistance and were basically shot to pieces, I'm afraid. They had very heavy casualties.
Parts retrieved from Arnhem are being copied to use on Shawbury's replica Horsa. Major Ray Conningham, himself a glider pilot, is the coordinator of the Assault Glider Project.
It's just like seeing two BBC.
Yes, well, these are the sort of things that the Dutchmen bring over from Arnhem.
Yes.
And from this kind of wreckage, we can make something like this. The wonderful thing about the Dutch is they collect these, they identify them, find the part number, so we can get to the drawing number.
That's right, yes.
And then make a thing like that. That's the thing that wiggles the elevators up and down. And this is from a very badly burnt out wreck of a Horsa. You can see the condition it's in. And this is the thing that held your tailplanes on.
Yes.
That went on there.
That's right. Yeah.
That was one tailplane, and the other tailplane went from over here. Yeah.
Oh, I see.
And if we'd known that's all that held them on, we wouldn't have flown them, would we?
That's very true.
There we are.
That's very possible.
That's marvellous, isn't it?
But of course we have to look after them because they're great treasures to them.
Oh,
They
yes.
consider every bit of this part of their national history. Everyone came from a glider full of brave men.
The rebuilt bridge at Arnhem cements the bond between the Dutch people and their liberators. Jeff is one of the British veterans who regularly stay with host families like Johan van der Laaks.
Oh, it's good to see you. Oh, it's fantastic, isn't it? It's great to see you.
Wonderful to see you. Really marvellous.
Oh, man.
Yes. Can't believe it.
Let's go in.
That's lovely. Yeah. It's a subject, of course, that here in Arnhem they make a lot of it, whereas back at home it isn't often discussed.
And nobody talks about it.
Nobody talks about it openly. No. It's not remembered in any way, really.
It's just another battle.
It's just another battle.
Yes.
But I think it's marvellous to think that here in Arnhem that is remembered so reverently.
September the 17th, 1944, the largest airborne assault in the history of warfare began. 35,000 men, 3 divisions of Allied glider and parachute troops, including around 500 British gliders, were to land behind enemy lines in broad daylight. The 1st Airborne Division's objective was to seize and hold the bridge at Arnhem, opening the way to Germany. The Allies believed the Germans already beaten. The first day had been easy. Geoff Thompson's was one of 200 gliders to touch down on the 2nd day. 7,000 German troops with 400 guns were waiting.
This is a field where we actually landed. And
on a day like this?
Not quite as fine as this, but we were delayed with fog initially. We all came in from that area. We asked the boys that came back after the first day what it was like, and they said it was marvellous. It was there was no position. It was just like an exercise. But the second day when we came, it was quite different. Some of the gliders sank in the polder and tipped upon their noses, and they were in no regular pattern at all. They were crisscrossed, and it was a case of dodging in between them as you were landing.
Did you make a safe landing?
Fortunately, yes, I was one of the lucky ones, Johan.
And Germans all around?
And Germans all around in the woods. They'd been alerted, and as we came into land, of course, they were opening fire on us, and there was quite a lot of casualties, unfortunately.
It took less than 15 seconds for the gliders to empty their cargo of troops, weapons and jeeps. Geoff's men drove off, leaving him to follow on foot to the bridge. He was only lightly armed and carried few rations, as it was thought the airborne troops would be relieved within days.
This is a farm which we came across. The people there were absolutely marvellous. They came out and supplied us with milk and fruit and welcomed us with open arms. To think that we landed in all their fields.
Under constant fire, the men followed the railway line towards Oosterbeek.
Careful, Geoff.
Yes, yeah. This is the part of the wood where we were hemmed in by, surrounded by all the Germans, of course. And when we got so far down here, we heard these aircraft coming over, and we assumed, of course, that they were ours.
Yeah.
And then when we ran out of the wood to see them, we realised, of course, that they weren't ours. They were German Messerschmitt 109s, and they completed a circuit and came back and shot all the treetops off, and then the branches just rained down on us underneath. No way that we could get out. Yes, it was really scary.
I bet it was.
Yes, and we all ran back, of course, and laid down in the woods. We had to dig in overnight, and the situation was really horrendous.
After 2 days, they reached the Hartenstein Hotel, 3 miles west of the bridge. Here they dug in and made sporadic patrols. They'd only advanced 8 miles.
We eventually made our way down to the Hartenstein here, which was then the HQ. There was the continuous reverberation, of course, of the gunfire and the sniping and voices calling out and people running about all over the place. It was quite horrendous, really.
The Hartenstein is now a museum for the airborne forces and a place of pilgrimage for German as well as British soldiers.
Of course, the problem was lack of water, and lack of ammunition was another problem, of course. We had a limited supply here, but we were getting terribly short. Lack of sleep, a shortage of food. We were grateful to think that a lot of the Dutch people had managed to make a lot of bottled fruit, of course, which we appreciated very much. We were all dug in trenches around this area. You were never able to relax in any way. We were being mortared quite regularly. They were these multi-barreled rockets which they were using, and we could hear them fire the rocket, and then you heard the whistle, and then of course they came crashing down all round us. As you know, of course, the Germans are very methodical, and you could almost tell to a certain time when the mortaring would start again. When we did get a break in the mortaring, of course, we were surrounded by people who had been wounded, and even people who had been killed, actually, and it was a problem getting to them and removing them. It is quite emotional in many respects, because it brings a lot of memories flooding back.